The women stood in a crooked line, barefoot in the dust, their kimonos stiff with salt and smoke. Hunger had hollowed them into silhouettes, yet there they were, waiting not for punishment, but for bowls of steaming rice handed out by strangers in khaki. The smell was unreal, like some cruel mirage rising out of the war's ruin. Michiko clutched her baby closer, the child's ribs sharp against her forearm. She had expected rifles, shouting, the sudden crack of finality. Instead, she was met by the quiet efficiency of American soldiers, their boots sinking softly into the mud as they ladled out food as if they were priests administering some new communion. Only days earlier, she had crouched in a bombed-out cellar as the sky glowed orange and the ground shook with distant thunder. Her husband had been conscripted 2 years ago and never returned, leaving her with the baby and the endless wail of hunger. She had been taught that Americans were demons, barbaric, merciless. Mothers told their children they would be slaughtered if captured. And yet here she stood, staring into a face no more monstrous than a weary farm boy's. One soldier, seeing her hesitation, grinned through his sweat and gestured for her to step forward. His teeth were too white, his kindness suspicious, but hunger dragged her feet. The first mouthful was almost unbearable. The rice was warm, fragrant, not the gritty substitute she had been boiling from weeds. Her throat tightened with the shock of salt. Tears came, blurring the edges of the camp around her. The wooden huts lined up like obedient children, the flags snapping in the wind, the barbed wire glinting like a necklace of thorns. She ate quickly, like someone afraid the miracle might be snatched away. When her baby coughed, an American nurse knelt and pressed a tin cup of milk into Michiko's hand. For a long moment she could only stare. Milk was a memory from before the war, a luxury she thought gone forever. That night, lying on a cot softer than anything she had felt in years, Michiko waited for the cruelty to begin. Surely the kindness was a trick, a prelude to something worse. But morning came quietly, with the smell of bread baking and a line for soap. Soap! She had not seen it in months. Her hair was a stiff, greasy rope down her back, and when she scrubbed herself at the pump, gray water ran down her arms. She wept again, not from grief but from the shocking relief of feeling human. Other women laughed through their own tears, their naked shoulders glinting in the pale sun. Days passed, and with each one the fear melted a little more. The Americans were organized, almost obsessively so, meals at the same hour, medical checks that felt like rituals. Michiko saw women with festering wounds cleaned and dressed, saw a girl with a fever carried to the infirmary and returned smiling, clutching a piece of hard candy. Even the guards seemed oddly gentle, their rifles slung carelessly, as if they trusted the prisoners not to flee. Some of the women began to speak softly with them, practicing halting English. Others still kept their heads down, unable to believe the walls of their lives had shifted. At night, the camp was quiet except for the crickets and the low murmur of women rediscovering the sound of their own voices. Michiko found herself laughing, an unfamiliar sound that startled her. She thought of her husband, if he still lived, and wondered if he would recognize the woman she was becoming. Cleaner, fuller, a little less afraid. There was guilt in that thought. Was it betrayal to find comfort in the enemy's care? But when she watched her child's belly rise and fall after a meal, when she saw color bloom in his cheeks, the guilt softened into gratitude. The transformation was not only in the body, but in the air. The camp began to smell of soap, of boiled rice, of life returning. The barbed wire no longer looked like the teeth of a trap, but the frame of a garden fence, holding chaos at bay. Outside, the country was in ashes. Inside, there were routines, schedules, even small jokes. An old woman complained that the bread was too sweet, and the others laughed until they cried. It was absurd. After years of hunger, they now had the privilege of disliking the taste of food. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Michiko saw a group of children playing tag near the barracks. Their laughter was high and wild, the kind of sound the war had almost erased from memory. An American guard leaned against the fence, smiling faintly, as if the sound itself were enough to justify the war's end. For the first time, Michiko let herself breathe deeply, filling her lungs until it almost hurt. But with every day that passed, a new unease began to creep in. The women were growing stronger, their cheeks rounder, their clothes replaced with sturdy dresses from American stores. Rumors spread that they would soon be released, sent back to what was left of their towns. Michiko could not imagine the road beyond the gates. She pictured the ruins of her home, the neighbors scavenging for scraps, the black markets and disease-ridden alleys. Here there was order. Here, her child slept through the night. On the 7th morning, she awoke to find her baby smiling up at her, fat as a peach, milk dribbling from the corner of his mouth. The sight should have filled her with hope, but instead a strange fear bloomed in her chest. What would become of them when the gates opened, and the barbed wire no longer held back the hunger waiting beyond? She lay still, listening to the clang of breakfast bells, and for the first time she wished the war had lasted just a little longer. Long enough to keep them in this strange, impossible paradise. The announcement came on a morning washed in gold, when the cicadas screamed so loudly it felt like the earth itself was vibrating. The interpreter stood on a wooden crate and shouted the words through a crackling megaphone. The war was long over, the camps would soon be dismantled, and all internees would be sent home. The news rippled through the crowd like a gust of cold wind. Some women cried out with joy, others simply froze, bowls of rice halfway to their mouths. Michiko felt the air leave her chest. Home. The word should have been a promise. Instead it sounded like a sentence. The women gathered that night in the dim glow of a single lantern, whispering about what awaited them. They spoke of burned cities, of neighbors fighting over weeds and rat meat, of children trading their toys for scraps of barley. One woman confessed she had no home to return to at all. Hers had been turned to cinders in the firebombings. "Here we eat until we are full," she murmured, her fingers clutching the edge of the cot. "Out there, we will starve again." The room fell silent except for the crackle of insects outside, as if even the night was listening. Michiko sat apart, her baby nestled in her lap, heavy now with health. She watched the shadows play across the baroque walls and thought of the day she first arrived, gaunt and half-mad with fear. She had hated the barbed wire then, hated the way it divided her from freedom. Now she feared its absence. The wire was no longer a prison but a shield, a thin silver line keeping death on the other side. Without it, she would have to face the ruins of her world. The next morning, a few of the braver women approached the American command tent. They bowed deeply, their voices trembling as they spoke through the interpreter, begging to stay. The soldiers looked baffled. Prisoners pleading not for release but for captivity. It was something out of a fable. One young lieutenant tried to joke, saying, "Ladies, this is the first time we've had trouble kicking people out of jail." But the women did not smile. Their dignity was all they had left, and they laid it down at the feet of strangers, asking for mercy. Word spread quickly through the camp, and soon others joined them. Michiko was one of the last to step forward. When it was her turn, she held her child up as proof, as if his plump cheeks could argue better than she could. The interpreter's voice caught when he translated her plea. She did not want her baby to grow thin again. For a long moment, the officer only stared at her, his face unreadable. Then he nodded, slow and almost sorrowful, as if he too wished he could keep them safe forever. Days passed, and still the orders stood. Trucks arrived with supplies, not to feed the camp, but to transport the women out. Each morning they were called by name, loaded onto the vehicles, and driven through the gates. Some wept openly, clutching at the air as if they could hold onto the place by force of will. Others were silent, staring at the horizon where smoke still coiled from distant villages. Michiko's turn came near the end. She dressed carefully that day, smoothing the fabric of her borrowed dress, braiding her hair so tightly her scalp ached. She wanted to look strong, as if strength alone could persuade fate to leave her here. The baby fussed against her chest, sensing the tension, and she sang to him under her breath, a lullaby her mother used to sing before the world cracked apart. When the gate opened, sunlight spilled through like a blade. She climbed into the truck, her feet heavy as stones, and sat among the other women. No one spoke. The engine rumbled, and the camp began to slide away behind them. The barracks, the pump where she had first washed herself clean, the wire that gleamed like a guardian's crown. Her throat closed, and for a moment she thought she might leap from the truck and run back, consequences be damned. But the road stretched ahead, and she stayed seated, clutching her child so tightly he whimpered. The truck bounced over ruts, and the sound of the camp grew fainter until it was swallowed by the wind. Around her, the women stared straight ahead, eyes shining with tears they refused to let fall. The further they went, the more the air changed, smokier, dirtier, sharp with the scent of ash. Villages appeared, skeletons of wood and stone, their roofs blackened, their streets crawling with scavengers. Hunger waited out there like a patient predator. Michiko pressed her lips to her baby's head, breathing in the clean smell of him one last time. She could already feel the weight of the world pressing back in, the ache of survival returning to her bones. Yet somewhere deep inside, a new hardness was forming. She had known care and dignity, and the sound of children laughing in safety. She would not forget it. As the truck crested a hill, she turned to look back one final time. Far behind them, barely visible through the haze, the glint of the barbed wire caught the sun like a last farewell. For a moment, it looked less like a fence and more like a halo circling the memory of a brief, impossible heaven. The sight struck her like a blow, and she felt something within her lock into place, a vow she did not have words for. When the truck rolled down the other side, the camp was gone from view, but it burned inside her like a second sunrise. Whatever waited in the ruins, she would face it. But some part of her would always be walking the clean lanes between the barracks, breathing the steam of hot rice, hearing the clang of breakfast bells. And when the hunger came again, as it surely would, she would close her eyes and remember the taste of paradise, because once, for a brief and terrible and beautiful moment, she had lived inside it. Which city are you watching our video from? For more powerful stories from World War II, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.